Hello and welcome to a tutorial on how to make the log cabin mug rugs. So this is the original, the one that you see in the photos of the pattern, but we're going to be making some out of scraps. That's what I've been working on. So and we've just done a sew along in our group. So I've cut out a whole heap of scraps. So you can see I've got red ones, I've got pink ones, I've got purple ones. The originals were done in Christmas fabric, but they don't have to be. So at any type of fabric, they're just brilliant. Now, a mug rug is like a big coaster. It's great. It's big enough to put a cup and a biscuit or a bit of a sandwich. If it gets grotty, throw it in the wash. So that's the reason. You can also feature a bit of fabric, such as our Christmas ones, or you can make up some great gifts out of scraps. So following the directions in the pattern for cutting your pieces. Now I'm going to try and lift up the one that I've cut out. You can see how I've laid this out like this. Actually, I'm going to change the camera angle so that you can see down and I can explain a little bit more without dropping them. This is very much a traditional log cabin. We have our center square. Let me just move all the pieces aside a little bit. This has just been laid out ready to stitch. So we have our center square. Our next piece is the same width as the square, but it's a log, so it is narrower. This piece will then match, generally they will match this one. If you're doing it completely scrappy, you don't have to. Once these two are sewn together, this one will fit along this side. And then this one goes along this side. Then we have the next log, which will go along this edge. So from the center, we are working in a spiral form of attaching. This one, so if this is piece 0, and in the pattern it is, then you have piece 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. In the pattern there will be a side piece that makes it into a bit more of a rectangle. On a couple of mine, I have done this in strips of whatever scraps I could to make it big enough, so you can create your own fabric as you would. So traditionally, these two are the same fabric as are these two. And so you've got these sides of the block which are the same. The logs are the same. That is a very traditional way. And I'll show you the original one. These two logs are the same as are these two, etc. But if you're making it up as a scrap, using up scraps, it doesn't have to be. I had enough scraps to create this one. So this is very simply how we're going to attach the pieces. Piece 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I'll show you that process and then we'll get into the quilting and the binding so that you can go ahead and feel confident to make your own. On my machine I have set the 1/4 inch foot so that I know my seam allowances are going to be accurate. I am going to just do one at a time. Often when I sew these, I will sew 2 at a time so that I can not waste thread in between. I'm going to use a leader or a scrap of fabric, which will mean that my thread tension doesn't change and I don't chew the start of my sewing. So take the center square and piece number 1, right sides together, line up your edges. If you are more comfortable pinning, then that's what you should do, and stitch across that block. I have my machine set to a stitch length of about 2 1/4. Get my leader and I'm going to run that through again. Now you will use about the same amount of thread using the leader and ender as if you were to pull out this each time. Here I am going to finger press that piece 1 open. I'm going to get piece 2, which if you've laid them out as per the pattern, will now fit nicely along the edge. So remember, we're working around in a circular fashion around a square. Right sides together, line up your edges, and sew. That thread out of the way. Cut the leader off and run that through again. And finger press that seam also. And get rid of any loose threads at this point. So I have piece 0, the centerpiece, piece 1, piece 2. So if I were to put that down in the middle again, it sits very nicely there. Then you can find piece 3 will now fit along that edge, and sew that one. So you can finger press that open, and we have completed 3 sides of our square, our center square. So I'm going to get piece 4. You can see here I've actually joined some scraps to make that long enough. And press that one open as well. Now we're heading back over to this side now, so we're going back to the darker colors. So piece 5, right sides together. Now keep in mind that you've got 2 seams under here, and you want to make sure that I've been pushing mine outwards. If you feel the need to press them so that they stay flat, that's okay. For the purpose of being faster in the video, I did not choose to do that. And that is piece 5 in place. Now the matching log to that one is piece 6. Yes, my piece 1 and piece 2 are slightly different reds. Again, I was making them out of scraps, but I had enough of the rest of them to make the logs the same, which again, as I said, is the traditional way of making a log cabin, but is not the only way. So if I orient it back to how the original picture, it's piece 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're now going to do piece 7, which is coming onto this side and is back to the lighter fabric. Right sides together, align your edges. And finger press outwards. So our last piece for the log cabin part is piece 8. So keep in mind, you always want to be going next to the log that you just finished. And that is our completed log cabin part of this project. So the piece that I have now is the side piece, and I have to decide, do I want the side piece to be next to the red? It's actually the same fabric as this one. Do I want it to be next to that, or do I want it to be separate from it? Can't quite decide. Don't think I like it next to it. I think I might put it like opposite. And remembering that, you know, this is your project and you can do whatever you like. Now I have actually joined a small piece here as well, so I did not trim it back to size, so it's slightly larger than it needs to be, and that's quite okay. I'm actually going to put the join that side so it's not near the other seam. Line up your edges and stitch it to and there you have your completed log cabin mug rug front. So based on my time clock, with me talking and going quite slowly, that has taken 8 minutes. So once you get going, you'll be able to make some very quick gifts and use up your scraps. That's the front part. We still need to do now the quilting and then the binding. So I'll get ready for that and come back to you. For the quilting part of the log cabin mug rug, I'm going to be using a walking foot. So the advantage of a walking foot is that it has these extra teeth on the top. So like the teeth, the feed dogs in your machine, they will grip from the top and means you get less slippage when you're quilting through 3 layers. So this lever here on mine needs to go above the needle bar because you can see that actions the feed dogs to go down and grip the top of the quilt sandwich. Essentially what we're making is a very small quilt. So, you know, let's make it as easy as we can. This is my backing piece. It is pieced again. As I said, I've been using up scraps. But it's all the same fabric, I just didn't have enough in one large piece. My wadding is also leftovers from various projects, so I am laying this out and I'm lining up this edge here so that I know where to start with my top. That one is at the iron. I'm about to press that to make sure all my seams are sitting flat, and then we will show you the quilting steps. My top is all pressed and I'm just going to move this slightly sideways so you can see there's my backing, and I need to line up my quilt top. I'm going to do it in the middle. Yes, the excess will get trimmed off, but I'm going to line up these edges because then I know it's sort of sitting straight. Alright, all I'm doing is pressing and smoothing this little quilt sandwich. I don't usually pin, because you think that might be easier. You can. It's sort of small enough that you don't really need to. Alright, just a quick word about the quilting path. Now I just want to zoom in slightly on this one. I have found the best place to start is to find the first log and here, this corner here. So at the end of piece 2, where that is at the corner of the centerpiece. So this is piece 1, piece 0, piece 1, piece 2 or log 2, this point here. The reason being is that where the quilting that we do simply on this is to go in the ditch. We go around that center square and we're back to where we started, and we keep going to this point here. Then we go around these logs and keep going to this point here. We go around these logs and we essentially go off the little mini quilt here. I would then travel across here and stitch down the side here. And so that is pretty much all you need to do with that side of the quilting. On this side here, you can mark yourself some lines and quilt straight lines. You can leave it unquilted. If you'd leave it unquilted, I would very quickly stitch around the very edge just to keep it nice and together, so that it makes it slightly easier when we come to the binding. If you would like to quilt it more, then go right ahead. If you don't want to quilt around the squares at all, you can quilt it in any manner that you like. But if you do want to go in the ditch, this is the corner to start with, so that you go around the square, past where you started, and by going this way, what you're doing is you are not breaking up this colored log section. Not that it would be a huge problem, but if you don't want to have a stitching line in between them, then this is the point to start at. So what I'm actually going to do is quilt around the ditch, and then halfway in between, halfway down each log, I'm going to come back in and stitch a line as well. And I'll add some pictures so I can show you. When I get to the center, I'm going to add a square, and you'll see that when I do the quilting. Over here, I'm actually going to do some straight lines. I do like a little bit more quilting, and this is how I do it. What I'm using though is my walking foot as my guide, and I'll show you that when we get to the quilting. All right, I'm going to just put my needle down slightly so I know that it's in the right spot. A couple of locking stitches to secure the start, and then I'm stitching in the ditch to this next. Now I am using a nice grey thread, so it's highly contrasted in on this project, but I actually think it'll be a bit of fun, but it's good for you guys to see how I'm quilting this project. So this is our starting point, and I'm going to go past it till I come to that seam line. In the ditch to that one. Don't hurry, just take it slowly and easily. And this is our final seam where we would end up off the mug rope. So it's at this point I'm actually going to do my square back in. So I'm approximately halfway in the middle of this row. If you're not good at eyeballing, then I suggest you draw yourself a line. But with the quick and easy gift, I guess I don't want you to overthink it. Now it might seem that I am a little bit too far close to this edge here, but this is my raw edge and it's going to have my binding on it. So I'm basically in between this seam line here and where my binding would be once it's done. Alright, so we've already done this one here and I need to stop in the middle of this row. Oh, I need to go one more stitch. There we go. Note the position of my hands. I'm just sort of guiding the fabric through and letting the feed dogs and the walking foot do its job. And we're working our way inwards, stopping in the middle of each of the logs. And you can see it's nicely contrasted on the red because I'm using that lovely grey thread. Now here, I'm actually going to stop. I'm going to guess about where it would be. Yep, that's not too bad. Changing directions, I'm going to create a square inside piece 0, or our center square. So I've met my stitching line. I'm going to do just some locking stitches and remove from there. Now I am going to cut my threads here. Top and bottom. Trim this thread from the start point. Alright, so with this side panel, oh, I do need to stitch down the side of this one. So let's do that as well. Holding my threads just in the ditch down the side here. Now, if you would like to create, I guess, the same spacing, then you could mark the same spacing across this part of the quilt, which these end up in this pattern 1 inch wide, so you can stitch 1 inch. If you want to, you could just use the side of your quilting foot and use that as a guide, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stitch across. You'll get to know how many stitches you need to do to move so that, see, my previous quilting line is lined up with the side of my foot. That is my spacing guide. Alrighty, I've got my binding ready, so the measurements for this are in the pattern. It is narrower than normal binding, and that is because we have a small quilt. We are keeping it in proportion to the quilt size. If you would prefer to use your normal size binding, that's fine, you can do that. Now my mug rug is trimmed and ready to attach the binding. You can see on the back here the quilting, because that was also in the grey thread, so it's nicely quilted and ready to bind. So we'll head over to the machine. I have my binding. I've had to join my binding. For how to join binding, that's in our tutorial on our website called Perfect Binding Every Time. That walks you through how to do a diagonal join in your binding. I have pressed my binding in half, so it's I don't have to fight to keep these raw edges together, purely because of the size of the binding. So let's head over and apply the binding. Now this is one long side of my binding. I am going to, I guess, line up the end of that with the edge of where the side piece starts, so that I've got, this is my tail that I'm going to leave free for joining. Now I want to leave pretty much this whole long side free for joining because it's so small. I need that amount of space. So when I start touching the binding or sewing it down, I'm actually going to start really close to the corner. My seam allowance for this is very narrow because we've got, so you need to do less than your 1/4 inch because you are, you've got a narrow binding. So on my walking foot, I'm just going to swing you around so that you can see, hopefully. On my walking foot, let me change the machine that way that you can see. The edge of my binding and my quilt sit underneath this. So I would probably say I have it's less than a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I am going to stitch to the corner, well, not quite to the corner. There. Turning my quilt to, I'm going to stitch out of the corner. The needle is down and that's okay, I'm going to leave it down. Bring this to the front. Let's just adjust the camera slightly so that you can see exactly what I'm doing. So I've really only done a very small seam, but I did do some locking stitches here because of the tension that will be under later when we do our join. From here, I'm going to take our binding, fold it up, so we've got this 45-degree angle. And this edge of my binding, the raw edge of my binding, is actually in line with the rest of my mug rug. Fold it, so I've put my finger here. Fold it down on top of itself and line up the fold with the top edge of your mug rug, lining up the raw edges down here. Now what I do is I grab these threads because I'm still attached to the machine. I grab these threads and I'm putting this up against the needle so that it's ready to sew, putting the foot down. I had to let go of these threads to put the foot down. Now I'm grabbing hold of these threads again, and that's for 2 reasons. I do not want a bird's nest underneath the corner of my quilt, and I'm also going to use these threads to pull backwards using these threads, I'm going to help the machine with this start because there's a bit of bulk just there. So we're going to pull on those threads, just a bit of tension, a bit of a light pull, and help the machine over the edge, and that way it won't bend up the edge when it's trying to sew and you are helping it start off. Now I'm letting them go and I will continue down this side. Lining up the raw edges, keeping your seam allowance the same. And don't go all the way to the edge. Oh, there we go. And I'm stitching out. I'm stitching out of the corner at a diagonal, at a 45-degree, and that will help you. Can you see that? Right. So we're here. Once again, we've already turned our thing, so our new sewing line is down here. Fold upwards, and you create that 45-degree fold. Put your forefinger there and fold back on yourself, making sure the fold is in line with the top, the edge that you have just sewn. Line up the first part. Now grab hold of these two and you're creating a bit of a loop, so you're pulling a little bit of thread out, putting it underneath your foot. You can let go of them at this point and put the foot down. Now grab hold of that loop again and a little bit of tension backwards to help the machine stitch over the bulk that is in that corner. you will get a neater corner and you will not have bunching of fabric. All right, maintaining the same seam allowance all the way around. Mine is probably about 4 mil in metric. I've just gotten to know what it will be, how it will work. No, I need to go one more stitch. There we go. And turning at 45 degrees, I'm stitching out directly to the corner. I don't have a, oh, I do have a ruler. Let's have a look at what this is in. Okay, so this would probably be, if this line here is 1/4 and that's an 1/8, it's so 3/16 of an inch is what my seam allowance is. All right, here we go with our corner again. It's always good to have this done. This is the bit that tricks most people. So this is what we've just sewn. I've not cut my threads. If you want to, you can, but I like to just have that loop. I will snip them off later. Fold upwards, which creates the 45-degree angle. Put your forefinger here to hold that and flip down over the top of yourself, top of itself, aligning the fold with the raw edge. Line up the next sewing path, the next raw edges, and put it underneath your foot. Make sure you're happy with the placement. Hang on to these loops and gentle tugging, not tugging, but just a tension to help pull that first bulk through the machine, and then keep stitching. Now this is, I'm very thankful that my join is not on a corner, because that's annoying and creates a lot of extra bulk. Alright, here's our last corner. Okay, need to do one more stitch and then stitching out the corner. Okay, so one more time. I'll pull myself a bit more thread. Folding up to create the diagonal line. The diagonal fold, folding back on itself. My fold is aligned with this raw edge. My fabric is aligned, my binding fabric is aligned with the raw edge I'm about to sew. Now, we are not, a little bit further over. I am not going to stitch very far here because remember this is our first side and this is the side we're going to join on. So let's just holding onto those loops. And that's as far as I'm going to sew. If you want to, instead of doing locking stitches, you can just move your fabric to the side and stitch off your mug rug. Okay. I think, oh, I've caught it. There we go. I'm going to snip my threads, and then I'm going to snip all of these corner threads so that they're not in the way later. Because ultimately we don't need them, they were just handy at the time. And my starting threads, I'll get rid of those as well. Alright, let's move over to a bit of space so that we can do the cut for this final join. The final join with binding, this is something that stumps a lot of people as well. I am going to, if this is about halfway, then I want this to be not quite halfway, so I'm going to snip off that much, which is only about 1/2 inch, but I want this free section to be about a bit more than halfway past the whole width, and that's because I want the join to be in the middle. We're going to keep that piece that we cut off, okay? Just unfold it and keep it to the side. With the piece that at our end that we've just finished sewing, if we lay that over the top, but so that we can still see the bottom piece, okay? So that's how it would, and you can do this on any quilt, any size quilt. This is what I do every time. Lay that piece on top of this one, lining up the edges. So this is where my underpiece finishes. If I move it aside, you can see. And if I line that up, actually I'm going to scooch it that way just a little. So I'm lining it up. So it overlaps to the width of your binding. And then you're going to cut the top piece in line with, sharper scissors would be handy at this point. Okay, in line with the, I'll just separate them slightly. And it's actually good that they're different colors because you can see. This is my lower piece, and this is the piece that I cut off, which I'm using as a measuring tool, and I want my overlap to be the same width as the width of my binding. Okay, so we're going to remove that. Both of those pieces, the piece that we cut off and this small piece, are now scrap. From here, we're going to open up both edges. Just get your fingernail in between them if you can. Oh, it doesn't want to open. All right, now keeping in mind that I'm not going to do this. I am going to do a diagonal join, and this is how you do it on the last bit. Now your quilt will give, and that's what you want it to do. So we're going to go from here. If you put your thumb inside each one, now with your left one, turn it so that your thumb is on the right side of the fabric. Now put them together so that the right sides are together and they are at a 90-degree angle. If you need to squish your quilt up in between this to manage it, that's what you do. Get some pins, and you want to pin. I usually pin this way so that it helps hold. So I'm lining up those edges and those edges. And I pin also at 90 degrees, but in that bottom 90-degree corner, which helps support that join. If you would like to, and it would help you, put a pin across the top. Now what we're going to do is stitch a line from, let me use my scissors, from this point here all the way across to, if I just scoot that fabric aside, the other point there. So a diagonal line. If you find it easier to mark this, that's something that you can do that will help. All right, I have a marking pen here. I am going to just do it by eye so that you can see where I mean. So that is the point that I need to get to, and there. All right, that is my stitching line. So if you need to think about it, you need the point, the free point at the top, and it will be at the side when we get to the sewing machine, and that's your sewing line. Oh, sorry about that. We are at the sewing machine. Now, to manage this, because it doesn't want to sit as flat, if you want to, with your mug rug, you can put it in your hand and sort of hold it steady. And then start stitching. Hold on to your threads. Now, yes, I can see that this is a little bit scrunched up, but where I'm stitching, it isn't. So it's going to be okay. Stitch that seam. I'm going to trim my threads here. There we go. All right, remove the pins. And at this point, I do a test. Let's just put it this way. I'll tuck it under the feet so we can see. Do a test. Is that, yes, it's bulky in the middle. Is that going to fit along that edge neatly? I haven't twisted either side, and it's going to work. Yes, it will. So now I'm going to carefully just trimming the edge triangles to get rid of those. And so I'm leaning on the bed of the machine here. I'm going to finger press that seam open and then refold it so that it sits neatly. Realign the edges, and then we're going to stitch down that side. Alright, from here I've actually still got my threads still attached because I'm just going to do the next bit of stitching in preparation for attaching our binding. So for that I am going to change my stitch to zigzag stitch. If you have an overcast stitch, that's the same concept. I'm going to put my stitch length on 3 and my stitch width I'm not changing. The reason for this is we are going to overcast these edges. Let me just put the camera back in place here. Our raw edges, we are going to zigzag them. You can see I was holding onto my loops again there. Zigzag them to enclose them and keep them nice and neat, and putting your binding on will be so when your binding is on, flipping it over to the back is going to be a bit easier. Now, do not stitch on that corner fold. You need to stop before you get to that. So I folded that out of way. Now I'm coming back this way and I'm going to fold it back down. The trick I find with this, I'm actually going to move the camera a little bit closer for you, is not to start directly at the corner. Okay, let's zoom in a fraction. So my corner is here, but there's that bit of fabric here that may want to kick up. So if you put that behind the, see my edge of my foot back there, there's a little bar. If you put that behind the bar and then start stitching, you're not going to get that bunched up into a little wad of fabric, which is actually going to be really challenging. And it's just, it's not pretty. All right, so as we get further along, you'll be able to see this corner. I'm going to fold that down and out of the way, but I do not want to stitch. Let's go a bit closer here. I don't want to stitch this, so I'm going to stop before I get to that. The foot is going over it, but my stitching is not. Okay. Lift the foot and change direction. Fold that down again. Put that fold past the bar, just because I find I don't get that bunching of fabric, and stitching zigzag. See, I've folded that one out of the way. I'll do one more stitch, but I did not stitch on the fold. Fold it back that way. And this is our final side where we did our join. What this does is it contains all of the edges, it flattens your seam allowance a little bit, and it means, we'll just zoom back out again, it means that all of your edges are contained, they are a little bit flatter. So if you're using quite a thick wadding, this can be very helpful. Alright, so once again, I'm going to go around and trim all of these. Actually, no, there's no loops of thread. All good. So that's what it looks like. And now we're going to finish the binding. This bit does involve a bit of pinning. Alright, doesn't matter which corner you start with. I like to get the corner. I put my thumb up into the corner and sort of push that together and then push it over, and that way you're maintaining a nice mitre, that fold that we did earlier on, and then fold it back fold it to the back, and you can see that it's quite a bit narrower than your normal binding. Now it may be quite wide on the back, but I would rather be able to catch it on the back than have to fight with it. So when I pin these, I'm going to pin sort of through the edge and out a little bit, and then I pin down the edge, the very edge. Let's get this into focus for you. The very edge of the binding. And now, so that's one side. Now the other side of the corner, and I will do the same thing. So through the edge, let's do it on camera, through the edge, and then down into the quilt. You may find it comes out the front, that's okay. So at this point I want to tuck in this mitre and make it nice and neat. The front mitre, the fold is on this side here. So I want to distribute the bulk and have the fold going the other way. You may do it differently. This is how I do it. So fold it there. I'm holding it with my thumbnail and then pinning across. So these pins I will actually leave in place until I have stitched. I am not in any danger of pinning that pin or sewing that pin because it's just a bit higher than where it's going to go. So we'll do the same thing with the next corner. Put my thumb in and push it to the back. Fold over the seam allowance or the binding to the back. I'm going to go in through the edge and then out again. When you just want to grab one pin, but it doesn't work. And go that way, and then with my thumb I'm pushing that up underneath and creating a nice fold. Think of it like a hospital corner on a bed. You want to make it nice and neat so that it joins and sits flat. This bit in the middle, a couple of pins, and that will help hold. Okay, so basically do that all the way around. Okay, so looking from the back, you can see I've got a diagonal pin in each corner, which holds my mitre in place. And I have numerous pins around each side, holding all that. Now that may seem like a lot of pins, and it is, but that's better than unpicking and having to redo. So the time you save by not unpicking is worth putting the pins in. All right, let's move to the machine, and we're going to stitch in the ditch from the front. Now, when I mean in the ditch, I mean right in there beside that we've attached the binding. So if I was to do this in red, it would actually be very easily hidden away. I still got the grey in the machine, and that's what we're going to use. Okay, I've set up my machine to start. I'm just near a corner. I am on one of the lighter fabrics, and that's so that my locking stitches, when I finish, are a little bit less hidden. All right, so if you noticed what I did just then, check that your stitch is back to straight stitch at this point. All right, I am not doing locking stitches at the beginning because I'm going to go over my stitches at the end. I just need it to move over just a little bit so that my needle went in the corner. And let's move the machine slightly so that you can see. So, stitching slowly if that makes it easier. There's no need to rush. There's no prizes for first place. Stitching very slowly. I'm going to put my needle in the down position, and now I'm going to zoom in so that you can see exactly, I've got a bit of fluff just there, where my needle is going. Now I'm not removing the pins because I don't want to move any fabric, and I just want it to be right in that ditch. If I accidentally stitch onto this, it's going to be even more noticeable than what the stitching will be just beside it. In a contrast thread, this is almost like another bit of the quilting. It becomes a little bit of a feature. But if you were to do it in matching thread, it would actually be barely noticeable. So just going slowly so you can control where your needle's going. One more stitch, and so you can see we're on our final side here, so this part is so much quicker than the pinning. Don't you wish you could do it sped up every time? Alright, I'm going to hang on to my starting threads and go over them, and then do a couple of locking stitches or securing stitches. Let's just zoom out again, and I'll show you in just a sec. Alright, we're done. I can remove all of these pins. Done. I'll just hold it up closely here for you. You can see the silver or the grey thread is sitting right beside where the binding was attached. The binding is quite narrow. Obviously it's less noticeable on this light fabric. You can just see it there. And this is the back. And so that was my start and stop point. And we've got a little bit of thread I could trim off there. And I've caught the back all the way around. And then we have a completed mug rug. So I hope this has been helpful, and you get to make lots of them and use them for gifts and in your home. Keep in mind you can use them, you can make themed ones, you could make Christmas ones, so seasonal, themed, birthday, for gifts, send them overseas, anything you like. Have fun and enjoy using your mug rugs. Here we have another mug rug. All I've done for quilting on this one is straight lines all the way across. Because I had these 3 stripes in the side piece, because I was piecing fabric, I decided to continue with that. So each one has the 3 sections, so 2 lines down it. They're stitched in the ditch as well. There you go, you can see the quilting lines up close. Now my spacing is not 100% perfect, nor is it here. I've come slightly away from the ditch, but it's a mug rug. So it's not going in a show, it's not going to be winning prizes. It's gorgeous and purple, and it's quilted, and oh, can't see it on the back at all. But I really like the more heavily quilted look, but as gifts, this is quite quick and easy to quilt in this style if that's what you would like.